You ready to go? This hearing will now come to order. Thank you all for your patience. Dr. Marburger, last year we had snow. This year we had a memorial service, and I suspect we'll have some act up as we go through, and so we want to be courteous to your time and try to move forward. And I'm sure Mr. Hall will be here soon and add his presence to this good hearing. Now, last August, Congress passed and the President signed into law the Americans Competes Act, a response to the 2005 National Academy Report, Rising Above the Gathering Storm, and supported by a wide range of U.S. industries, universities, and science organizations. Competes seeks to ensure U.S. students, teachers, businesses, and workers will continue leading the world in science, innovation, research, and technology. And as we know, the global marketplace continues to become more competitive. The fact of the matter is, our country cannot and should not compete with the rest of the world on wages that are half of the world's, when half the workers in the world make less than $2 a day. Our country needs to compete at a higher level and with better skills and higher productivity. This was a goal of the American Competes Act. The law presents a balanced set of policies to improve our country's short-term and long-term competitiveness. Competes invest in long-term science and research, but also short-term technology development and innovation. And just as importantly, Competes ensures that not only that our nation will produce the world's leading scientists and engineers, but also that all students will have a strong grounding in math and science and are prepared for technical jobs in every sector of the economy. And although the administration's budget is supportive on basic research, it is weak on several other components critical to our nation's competitiveness. Unfortunately, our students are far from measuring up compared to other industrialized countries. According to the latest OECD program for International Students Assessment, students in America rank 25th out of 30 developed countries in math. In science, the news is just as bad. U.S. students ranked 21st in science, down from 19th in 2003 and 14th in 2000. In fact, 25% of U.S. students failed to reach even a basic level where they could identify scientific concepts or apply data at for a personal decision. Knowing this, I am deeply disappointed that yet again the President's budget does not make K-12 education programs at NSF a priority. The top recommendation of the National Academies was to ensure K-12 STEM teachers across the country have strong content knowledge and effective teaching skills. The National Academies report cited the UT Teach program, which was developed 10 years ago at the University of Texas, as an example of what is working for STEM teacher education. Based on its success, UTeach has been used as a model for the state of California in an effort to reform STEM teacher education. Likewise, the private sector has pledged significant funding to expand this teacher education model nationwide. This committee led the way in Competes, taking this top priority and revamping the NSF Robert Norris Scholarship. But under the administration's budget, the Norris program would receive only 10% of the funding needed to mobilize this new program. Competes also seeks to ensure that U.S. companies and small businesses lead the world in innovation, creating jobs in the process. Our country has lost 3.4 million manufacturing jobs since 2000, and 217,000 jobs lost in 2007 alone. And manufacturing employment in the U.S. now stands at its lowest point since 1950. Compete seeks to reverse this trend with robust funding for a manufacturing extension partnership and technology innovation program, both of which have a proven track record for return on investment and job creation. However, the administration's budget phases out MEP and eliminates TIP immediately. These programs help create good American jobs that this budget would put in jeopardy. And finally, Compete seeks to reduce our dependency on foreign energy and address global climate change through Advanced Research Projects Agencies for Energy, or ARPA-E, modeled after the Defense Department's successful DARPA program. ARPA-E is charged with rapidly developing and commercializing transformational clean energy technologies through collaborative research with universities, our national labs, and the private sector. Nothing like this research model currently exists within the Department of Energy. A successful ARPA-E will stand on its own with the department and have the authority and resources to quickly assemble teams to ramp up on research projects that neither industry nor the department will do on its own. A successful ARPA-E might just cause us to rethink how we do energy research in the United States, and I hope the administration will reconsider its lack of support for this program. And finally, Dr. Marburger, I appreciate the report on a variety of R&D programs included in your written testimony. But I also hope that you will address the important COMPETES programs authorized by Congress and signed by the President within your testimony. And now the Chair recognizes, just on cue, Mr. Hall for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You're always on time and proper and kind to senior citizens. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, Dr. Marburger. It's good to have you before us. And I'm sure we can all agree that striking the delicate balance between adequately funded and giving proper funding to our nation's priorities, while at the same time exhibiting fiscal restraint to reduce the deficit, continues to be quite a challenge. That's going in both directions at the same time. Likewise, I know we're also all in agreement that if we're to remain the world leader in competitiveness and innovation, we have to make the appropriate investments in research, appropriate investments in development, technology, and math and science education. I'm pleased to see the FY 2009 budget request gets us back on path to double the funding for physical sciences and engineering at the National Science Foundation, National Institute of Standards and Technology, and the Office of Science at the Department of Energy. Building on the President's American Competitiveness Initiative and Republican-led efforts in the last Congress, we stepped up to the plate and enacted the American COMPETES Act last year, authorizing increased levels of funding for these agencies. So I'm sure you shared my surprise and my disappointment when I realized that our friends over on the Appropriations Committee didn't see fit to adequately fund these agencies for this fiscal year. The funding they provided was not only 12% below the level that we authorized in COMPETES, it was 6% below the President's FY 2008 budget request levels. This is absolutely and just simply unacceptable. The returns that we receive from our investments in these agencies far exceeds the cost. As I've stated before, whether it's fighting the war on terror abroad or at home, ending our dependence on foreign oil, or inspiring our children to enter high-tech fields so that the United States can continue to push the frontiers of innovation, these agencies have critical roles to play. The budget before us today keeps us moving forward in this regard. Dr. Marburger, I'm pleased to see boost in funding for several science programs, such as the Advanced Energy Initiative at DOE, which works with solar, biomass, and hydrogen to move us toward a more secure energy future. But I do have a couple of areas of concern with this budget. There seems to be a number of places where the President has repeatedly cut out other important science and technology programs. The Manufacturing Extension Program at NEST, for example, is significantly cut or canceled each year. And each year, Congress fully funds the program. This year again, MEP is zeroed out in the budget. As for NASA, while the agency has had modest budget increases, they've been insufficient to meet the goals laid out in the President's vision for space exploration announced at the beginning of 2004. This has resulted in less ambitious development schedules for the shuttle's replacement, and this year's budget request does not keep up with inflation. In 2 years' time, we will find ourselves in a situation in which the United States will be entirely reliant on other nations for access to our multi-billion-dollar space station. I'm concerned that America's preeminence in space may be jeopardized if we do not narrow the gap between retiring the space shuttle and developing the Orion and the Ares launch vehicles before yielding back to the chairman. Let me just say a word about STEM education in this year's request. I recognize and support the President's efforts to improve our STEM education and all of their needs through the Department of Education. There should be more focus there. However, I have great concern that this budget does not likewise reflect the STEM education responsibilities at the National Science Foundation, particularly an expanded Robert Noyce Scholarship Program. Mr. Chairman, I thank you for having this hearing, and I certainly thank the presence of gentleman today who gives us his time, not only on his way here and preparing to be here, and the history of success that he brings to this committee. And I look forward to hearing your testimony. And Mr. Chairman, once again, I yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. Other members who wish to As I said, if there are other members who wish to submit written opening statements, we will submit it for the record at this time. Dr. Marburger, as you can see, there are some differences on this committee, but that we are, I think, in unison on many areas. We welcome you here. Let me introduce Dr. Marburger to Laura and some of the new members of our committee. He is the Director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy. He serves as the Science Advisor to the President and also co-chairs the President's Committee of Advisors on the Science and Technology and supports the President's National Science and Technology Council. So, Dr. Marburger, we welcome you here.
Thank you very much, Chairman Gordon, Ranking Member Hall, members of the committee. It's a pleasure for me to appear before you in this hearing once again on funding for the America Competes Act in the President's fiscal year 09 research and development budget. My written testimony has a lot of detail about the overall FY09 research and development budget, so I'll confine my oral remarks to the specific questions you asked me in the invitation.
Thank you.
First, let me express my gratitude to this committee for its support of the President's American Competitiveness Initiative and for its work on the very important Competes Act. This act embraces recommendations from a wide range of scientists, business, and education leaders, and there are many organizations who believe federal actions are needed to ensure America's future leadership in science and engineering, fields which are essential to the processes of innovation that lead to long-term economic competitiveness. I have on the screen a proclamation signed by almost 300 of those leaders. I look forward to working together with this committee to achieve the goals of the ACI and the Competes Act. You asked me how the President's budget addresses programs in the Competes Act within the jurisdiction of this committee. Because these details are spread throughout my written testimony and the FY09 budget proposal document, which is online this year, not even available as a book, my office has prepared a one-page table that summarizes the numbers that you asked for, and I just show a picture of the table. I'm not going to reference this table, but you will have copies of that gives you a detailed accounting for how the Competes Act fares in his 09 budget request. So first of all, let me talk about the bottom line. Of the $13.8 billion authorized for FY09 in the Act, the President's budget funds $12.2 billion, or 85% of the authorized. This total compares favorably with the 82% level at which Congress funded the Act within the FY08 omnibus bill. And the next slide shows a chart. The blue bars are the authorized amounts. The red bar is the omnibus level of appropriation for Competes funding. The green bar, so the bars on the left are for 08. The bars on the right are for 09. The green bar represents the President's request as a fraction of what was authorized. It's I think it's 85% of authorized compared with the 82% that was appropriated last year. If the President's request is funded, Competes Act budgets would grow by almost 15% under this budget. To place this in context, the President's overall request for all non-defense R&D increases by 6%, compared with the remainder of the non-security discretionary budget, which increases by less than 1% in this request. In constant dollars, growth in outlays in the non-defense R&D budget have increased by nearly a third under this administration. The final, my slide before you shows the growth in non-defense inflation-adjusted dollars for federal R&D. Total federal R&D in the 09 budget request stands at $147 billion, an increase of $4 billion over last year's appropriated, which represents 1 out of every $7 requested by the President in the discretionary budget, and a growth of 61% compared with 2001. These figures express the strong priority the President places on research and development. Even a 14% growth in Competes funding is not enough to cover everything authorized under the Act. And so the President's request follows well-defined priorities. The administration has accepted the conclusions of many studies and reports that funding for ACI basic research is most important and needs to be addressed first. The order in which you asked about specific programs in your invitation to this hearing is exactly the order of priority with which they are treated in the President's request. Research in physical sciences comes first, with increases of approximately 20% in this area for each of the National Science Foundation, Department of Energy's Office of Science, and National Institutes of Standards and Technology. Math and science education activities at NSF, so next priority, are also scheduled to increase. The NSF Education and Human Resources budget would grow by about 9%, and according to NSF's budget detail, education-related activities in other divisions would also grow. I should also mention that increases in Competes-related programs at the Department of Education are scheduled to increase by $143 million, which is a very substantial increase over the FY08 omnibus funding. These are the top priority areas. In view of the very serious underfunding of the top category of research in the FY08 omnibus and the urgent need to close the gap in this area, it was not possible to fund the remaining lower priorities within the constraints of this budget. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I believe the President's budget proposal is a very strong one for science and is responsive to the goals and priorities expressed in the America Competes Act. This is the third year in which the President is proposing a budget that would substantially strengthen America's long-term competitiveness in a globalized, high-technology world economy. And I hope that our joint efforts this year will lead to a FY09 budget that finally addresses the priorities that were established so long ago with such strong bipartisan support from such a wide array of constituencies. My written testimony contains much more detail, and I ask that it be made part of the record for this hearing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Marburger, and thank you for addressing our questions. We will now proceed to questions from this committee, and the chairman will recognize himself for 5 minutes. We have now seen 7 budget requests in a row that propose a range of funding for MEP that are, by most of us would agree, woefully inadequate. And each year there is a different justification for the cuts, and each year the committee has heard experts that will come in and testify to refute those justifications. This year the justification is, I think, the weakest of all. The administration says that the congressional intent was for MEP centers to stop receiving federal funding after 6 years. Can you explain that to me, Dr. Marburger?
The MEP program is a successful program that assists a private sector in their efforts to develop technologies that will help the U.S. economy. This administration believes that programs that help the private sector should be funded by the private sector, and that explains the pattern of budget requests by this administration over the years.
Well, many of us feel that by creating additional jobs and small businesses, we're going to be benefiting our country. But that's not what the justification was in the budget was that the congressional intent was for MEP centers to stop receiving federal funding after 6 years. Could you explain that?
I don't know what the explanation for the six-year period was. But there's no question.
I'm not trying to trick you here.
Yeah.
Let me just get the information on the table here. When the original Omnibus Trade Act was passed in 1988, it did have a 6-year sunset.
I see. Yes.
Yet in 1998, the bill was reauthorized, saying that it would continue. It needed to be reviewed, unless there was a review that said that it should stop, and no review has said that. And this authorization was continued in with the Competes Act. So once again, we're looking for a reason. I think that the reason that you gave orally is what you believe and what many of us don't concur with, and the reason that this committee has time after time on a bipartisan basis made that clear. Also, Dr. Marburger, Section 1009 of the Competes Act required your office to work with all federal science agencies to develop and issue principles to ensure that the federal scientists can communicate the findings of their research openly to the public and that their research will not be suppressed or distorted. These principles were to be developed within 3 months after the law was passed. Within 6 months after the law was passed, your office was to ensure that each federal agency developed and implemented policies and procedures consistent with these principles. And I would like to ask, what have you done to fulfill the requirements in Section 1009 of the Competes Act? And have you developed the principles? Have they been issued by your office? Have all federal science agencies developed and implemented policies based on these principles?
So my office has developed principles. In fact, I saw the final draft of those principles within the last few weeks. They have been submitted to the Office of Management and Budget for distribution to the departments for the kind of review that is specified in the Act. That will take some time, but we do want the agencies and offices to have buy-in to these principles so that we can be assured that they will be followed. Sorry that it has taken this long. It is a process that involves consultation with the agencies, but I do believe that we're on a good track to get this out. You will receive the information as soon as it's possible to get it to you in the form in which it's likely to be approved.
Well, better late than never. We hope that you will try to move this forward. I think it's important. And let me ask you, did you take any type of public comment or seek public comment on these principles as you were developing them?
We did not take public comment, as far as I know, on these principles, but they will go through an interagency vetting process that will expose them to public view that will inform the final version of them. I believe that several agencies have good models for a set of principles, and we drew heavily on those. NASA is one that I can name in preparing our document that we are now circulating to the agencies.
Well, we would certainly welcome to see that at the earliest convenience, Dr. Marburger. I want to lead by example. My time is up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Marburger, what are the consequences of the FY08 omnibus appropriations on the agencies that were targeted for increases in the American Competitiveness Initiative and the America Competes Act? And to follow up, how does the FY09 budget rectify this, what we call a funding dilemma? Congressman,
the agencies that were targeted for increases under the Competes Act and the ACI last year did receive some increases, but nowhere near the amount that were proposed by the President. In fact, I believe I have a slide, if it's still available, at the end. It shows the impact of the Competes Act funding, of the omnibus funding. But there were a few, it should be the one after that, yes. The green bars represent the presidential requests for the three priority agencies. National Science Foundation is the first, Department of Energy Office of Science is the second, and the NIST is the third. And on the right, the bars, the sum of the white and the red bars are the amounts that were actually appropriated in the omnibus bill. The red hatched bars indicate the amount of unrequested funds or earmarks associated with that funding, which I won't comment on, but you can see the difference is very great. And I believe that there has been some very significant adjustment required, particularly in the high energy physics program in the Department of Energy Office of Science and in the international fusion initiative called ITER, I-T-E-R. The omnibus bill specifically cut funding for these areas that has precipitated loss of jobs in some key national laboratories. Layoffs on the order of hundreds of trained scientists and engineers at SLAC, the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center in California, and at Fermilab in Illinois. This represents a serious problem for those laboratories. They're coping with it and adjusting their priorities. And it also causes a great deal of embarrassment for the nation because we have international commitments to the ITER program that just have to be fulfilled. So there are these specific consequences that have a more or less immediate impacts. In the longer run, of course, failure to fund these, I think, visionary increases causes us to lose opportunity. Other countries are investing in infrastructure for basic research in precisely these areas. These are the areas that support nanotechnology and energy technology and so forth, and we just need to catch up. This FY09 proposal from President Bush aims to catch up. He did not shrink from asking for large increases in the research budgets for these areas, and in addition, increases in other areas as well, including education and to the extent possible in more targeted technology areas. So I hope that answers your question.
I think it does. Let me get more up to date on another issue, and you may not can comment on this, but I'll ask it anyway, and at a later time when you can comment on it, we'd ask you to give us something in writing on it. I think you're going to allow us to do that, aren't you, Mr. Chairman, to ask for a follow-up.
Anything you want, Mr. Hall.
Just last night, the committee received a copy of the National Nanotechnology Initiative's called Strategy for Nanotechnology-Related Environmental Health and Safety Research. I just got that last night. I think staff did, ours did. I don't really know when the chairman got it. And he's entitled to get it first, and I understand that. But our staff's still reviewing it. Tell us how the FY09 budget addresses the recommendations in this report, if you know, and it may be an unfair question with this recent development.
I also just received this report this morning, and I do note that it includes the supplemental that is published annually, usually shortly after the President's budget request comes out. It's called National Nanotechnology Initiative 09 Budget and Highlights. And there are tables in this document, it's a very brief document, that shows how each agency has a share of the mission of under the National Nanotechnology Initiative. This is a robust initiative. The 09 budget provides increased support for this initiative increases from $481 million in '07 to $551 million in '09. And that's a substantial increase, and we think that the program is focused, and agencies are appropriately coordinating their work and participating in it very strongly.
I thank you for that. I've led you over and gone over my time. I yield back my question.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. That is an important document. I think it has just come to our office the same as yours. We look forward to looking that over. Dr. Marburger, I think you'll find that this committee will agree on much more than we disagree on. But just to set the record straight, let me concur that that we all are disappointed with the funding in the omnibus of the Competes bill. However, early last year, the House of Representatives passed by a large bipartisan margin 281 to 142, a Commerce, Justice, Science Appropriation bill that came very close to fully funding NSF and NIST programs under the Competes, as well as the President's ACI. The Senate passed a similar bill by a margin of 75 to 19. However, the White House issued statement of administration policy on the bill stated that the administration strongly opposed the House and Senate bills, and it would, and if the bills presented to the President, they would be vetoed. The White House issued an almost identical statement on the House Energy and Water Appropriation Bill, which came close to fully funding Competes and the ACI programs at the DOE Office of Science, just for everybody's information. Now, Dr. Baird, who oversees the committee that represents, that oversees, or is chairman of the committee that oversees NSF.
Dr. Marburger, thanks for joining us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I share the disappointment expressed by my colleagues on what happened at the end of the year last year, a bit of a self-inflicted wound by the White House to some extent, but unfortunately it wasn't self-inflicted. It was inflicted on the scientific community with, I think, unfortunate consequences. I want to just raise two general issues that are of concern to myself and my committee in particular this year. One has to do with the role of social sciences, and just briefly, you've probably followed the stories, for example, about DOD embedding anthropologists with its units in the field, and the units finding them incredibly valuable to address cultural issues in Afghanistan and in Iraq. We've had testimony before our hearing on energy, for example, that just changing the way one messages conservation efforts can increase efficiency by 34%. In terms of reusing towels and other things. Sound like small things, but on a nationwide scale, it's large. In the healthcare front, if you look at the rising cost of healthcare in this society, many of the illnesses that are driving healthcare costs up are behaviorally related. And if you look at transportation sector, highway safety, et cetera, which is a long introduction to a question of how you and the administration see the role of social sciences in solving some of this nation's priorities and within your budget. The second question I'll give you, and then you can answer both if you like. Another issue of concern to our committee and myself has to deal with science diplomacy. For many years, the United States led the world in a number of ways. This committee, I understand, had a subcommittee dealing with international science exchanges. I think actually prior to 9/11, those were actually declining, and I think we've lost our leadership role in that. And what are your thoughts about the administration priorities and where this country should go to regain our international standing as a leader in scientific dialogue and exchange? Those two questions would be much appreciated.
Thank you, Congressman. First, on the social sciences, I want to say, declare here that I am a strong advocate for social sciences. I believe that social sciences have a great deal more to contribute to the solving the difficult problems of society than they are now, and I hope that the increases that have been requested for the National Science Foundation will help those budgets and move us forward in that area. So
Thank you. That's great to hear.
I completely agree on a priority for the social sciences. Can talk much more about that if you
We
like.
should
but
get
there's
together
not
and do
time
that. We'd
here.
love
Yes,
to have you do that.
I would like to do that. On science diplomacy, by coincidence, after this hearing, I will be meeting with the European Science Commissioner, Dr. Potocnik, to discuss important large-scale science interactions that we have with the European Union. And next week, starting on Monday evening and extending for a day and a half beyond that, I will be leading a joint commission meeting with Russia. And the Minister for Science in Russia will be leading the delegation on the Russian side. So we have all of the major agencies that are under the purview of this committee represented in that in our team on that joint commission. I mention these activities to indicate that there is a continuing ongoing relationship with other countries, and that the President himself and the Secretary of State are both support the use of science in their diplomatic endeavors. It is important for us to maintain the funding that we've committed for these efforts. That's why I'm so disappointed in the ITER treatment in the omnibus bill. But we're going to just do this somehow. And of course, we have major cooperative initiatives in space and basic science, large machines, as the Large Hadron Collider comes online in Geneva later this year. Americans will probably dominate the team that's working there. So we think this is important, and we continually look to the State Department to support the efforts of all the agencies.
I'm pleased by both responses. I just want to thank you for that, and would like to follow up with you on both areas. And finally, I just would acknowledge I had the privilege of leading many members of this subcommittee to Antarctica, and I just want to commend the research that this country is conducting down there, and the NSF people, and all the folks who make that possible. I know you have a passion for that as well. It's really remarkable what they do there. Thank you, Dr. Marburger, for your service and your testimony today.
Right on time, Dr. Baird. And Ms. Ellers Ms. Biggers is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before I ask my question, if I could ask unanimous consent that an op-ed by Craig Barrett, the chairman of the Intel Corporation, that was in the San Francisco Chronicle on January 20th, 2008, be included in the record for today's hearing.
Without objection.
Let me just say that this article does have a quote that in talking about the funding decisions and the loss of funding in the omnibus bill, but he says the president expressed his happiness with the budget, and Senator Harry Reid, the Senate Majority Leader, said, quote, "The president didn't get his priorities, we got ours," end of quote. And I don't want to point fingers at anyone, but I really just want to say how serious this problem is and how important it is that hopefully we can do something. So with that, Dr. Marburger, I would like to start by commending you and President Bush for remaining committed to the American Competitive Initiative and the spirit of the America Competes Act in fiscal year 2009 budget request. I think, despite the failure by this Congress to fully fund related R&D programs in each of the last 2 years, I know that you're talking about the FY09 budget request, but I would just like to ask you if you could share with this committee what will be the consequences if Congress fails to restore the funding from that was lost in the FY08 budget. If we fail to fund that in a supplemental appropriation bill. Could you give us a damage report?
Congressman, I can't really speak to the what happens in FY08. I don't have any information on that. I do think that the best possible thing that could happen for those programs which are impacted by the result of the 08 omnibus bill would be a timely appropriation for the current request and swift action on appropriations during this session of Congress. I think that would send the right signal to the agencies whose funding has been, whose hopes have been dashed, and I think it would send the right signal to the international community. But I can't speak to the FY08 process. I'm sorry.
Well, what I was more concerned, and maybe you can speak to this, is, what happens with the personnel, the scientists and the engineers and support staff for these programs. My concern is that already we're seeing layoffs in some of the labs and furloughs and scientists already saying, I'm going back to France.
We have heard some stories like that. I know that the Department of Energy is doing everything they can to help those people whose jobs are impacted by the consequences of that bill, and we'll do everything. I've spoken directly with the Secretary of Energy and with the Undersecretary for Science, Dr. Orbach, and I know that they are working as hard as they can to make arrangements to deal appropriately with that. But I can't put a bright face on it. These are things that happen, and they are happening. There are impact reports available from the Department of Energy that I've seen, and it is possible to give more detail on the actual reductions in force that are required. I don't have the current numbers with me, but I know they've been reported in the newspapers as well.
Another consequence seems to be from American businesses who use user facilities, where they're going to be cut the usage of the research that they need to do to be innovative and creative.
Well, this is true. I focused on the most acute impacts, which were actual furloughs and layoffs. But the reason that these agencies are prioritized in the first place is that their budgets have lagged for decades, literally. And the facilities that they operate for the rest of the science community, which are very heavily used, are operated on very thin budgets. And so this year it has been necessary to curtail the running time of some of these important facilities, which are used by biomedical investigators and people working on energy technology, nanotechnology, and so forth. So there's no question that there has been a fairly broad impact on the ability of our nation to compete in these fundamental areas.
Have you talked at all to Secretary of State Rice about the international reaction to our failure to fund ITER?
I have not talked directly with the Secretary, but I've had discussions with her science advisor, Dr. Nina Fedorov, and I've been in touch with her regarding correspondence with the Secretary and others on this issue. So we're in very close contact with the State Department.
Well, I just hope that that the President, and I know that I'm sure that he does, because he's heard from a lot of us, but about the importance of this issue, and to every member in this committee, and the consequences if we fail to restore the funding. And thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Biggert. And Ms. Richardson is recognized.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here today, and it's a pleasure meeting with you and look forward to working with you. A couple questions. Number one, since I am a newer member, if you wouldn't mind supplying to the committee, you mentioned in your testimony what are some of the levels of how other countries are contributing and investing in this area. If you wouldn't mind giving us a more updated report of what some of those countries are doing, that would be of great help to me. And then as I go into my second question, I'd like to build upon what Chairman Gordon was saying in his initial questions, and that was you put up in your slide of the earmarks and request and all of that. But the bottom line is, within your particular department, there have been significant cuts. And our concern is, as a matter of this committee, we want to see we don't want to see a reduction in terms of programs and services. We would like to see an increase. Specifically, the National Nanotechnological National Nanotechnology Initiative had a barely increase of 2%, which doesn't even meet with the normal cost of living increases. And in particular, I'd like to point out to you the Manufacturing Extension Partnership. Since 2000 and the current administration, we've lost 3.4 million manufacturing jobs. These are high-skilled, high-wage jobs that are the backbone of many communities such as mine. NIST recently reported the results of a survey where manufacturers who used your program, NEP, program in 2006, after 1 year, you had 52,000 jobs that were created or retained, $6.8 billion in new or retained sales, $1.1 billion in cost savings, and over $1.7 billion of private investment leverage. So my question to you, sir, is did you request an increase for this program and also the NNI program? And if so, what did you request?
The two programs are quite different in how they're funded. To start with the NNI program, the NNI program is funded through the agency budgets primarily of the agencies that are targeted under the PCAST Act. And we roll up their expenditures on nanotechnology at the end of each year, and we also ask them to indicate how much they are spending in subsequent years. And I believe that's part of what this very recently issued document describes. I was just trying to identify the increases. So on nanotechnology, we do not ask for specific increases for that program. We ask for increases for the agencies that fund that program. The Department of Defense and the National Science Foundation have the largest share of that program, and I believe that funding will go up in those agencies this year. With respect to the Manufacturing Extension Program, our argument is not about the effectiveness of the program, but with how it's funded. And in my response to Chairman Gordon's question, I tried to give a succinct explanation for that, which is primarily that there is a difference of opinion about how that program should be funded.
So given the comments of this committee, and if we are saying that we're supportive of that program and we see the results of that, what could we anticipate from you of taking that back to the administration and reconsidering? Because clearly to have the budget, zeroing out for a program that is working and we're losing manufacturing jobs across this country, it's a very key priority for me.
Well, I don't believe that there's any chance that the President will change his request to Congress that's now before Congress. In response to your question.
Okay. Well, I look forward to you taking back this committee's comments to the administration.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Just for your information, Ms. Richardson, I think year after year, on a bipartisan basis, this committee has supported the MEP program and feel that it is very worthwhile. And fortunately, much of the funding has been replaced, although it is very tight there. Dr. Ellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, thank you, Dr. Marburger, for being here. Thank you for the hard work you're doing to try to straighten out what is a very unfortunate situation, which is a good deal. The blame belongs in the Congress for passing an omnibus bill which was totally inadequate in funding science and research. And we will have to continue to work together to try to correct that, but I appreciate your efforts on that score. I also thank the President for his strong support of the ACI and the authorization bill, and also attempting in fiscal year 08 to institute the ACI authorizations with full funding. Unfortunately, we find ourselves in a bad situation, and I'll get back to that in just a moment, but I do want to mention MEP always comes up every year, and I have fought assiduously for it. I've talked to Director of OMB and the Chief of Staff of the President about this at times, and complained about the little man in the basement of the White House who doesn't like MEP and tries to kill it every year. Now I know that little man is a big man, and he's not in the White House, and I do know where he is. But the point
but that's, that's in your shop and the president's shop and not in ours, so be it. I do want to point out, however, that we have a forerunner for the MEP. It's called the Cooperative Extension Service in the Department of Agriculture. Has been in place for many years, I don't know how many, but basically grew out of the land grant system, which the Congress developed in the 1860s or thereabouts. It's been around a long time. It's been very, very useful in making American farms the most efficient farms in the world. It works extremely well. And we as a nation spend $400 million a year to fund the Cooperative Extension Service, which is for agriculture. Agriculture today in this country employs about 1.5%, at most 2% of the population. Manufacturing, on the other hand, employs 14% of the workers in this nation. Now, I fail to understand the logic of the administration in saying, yeah, it's okay to spend $400 million a year on agricultural extension programs, which meets the needs, the training needs and so forth of 1.5% of the population. But it's totally wrong to support for manufacturing, which has 14% of the workers in the nation. And there's a strong philosophical disagreement here. I simply do not, and I'm not castigating you, I know what the situation is, but I simply do not understand an administration position which they've held on to for years. We continue to fight the battle. We continue to appropriate the money. It's just a silly conundrum to have to deal with. Having vented myself on that, let's get back to the real issue, which is the funding of research. We all have heard the stories about China and India and so forth. They are where they are for two reasons, because approximately 20 years, both countries, China and India, made major changes in their political structure and basically adopted the free enterprise system, a limited free enterprise system, and nevertheless they did it. Secondly, they strongly emphasized math and science education for their students. The result of those two major decisions of those countries is that they are beating us in manufacturing and production in ways we never anticipated. We already have the free enterprise system. That's how we grew where we did and how we became so strong. But we have not beefed up the math science education programs in our nation. And as a result, we are losing ground dramatically. And we also are faltering in our research efforts, whereas those countries are substantially improving them, as are almost every country in the nation. We're in danger of losing our status. Right now, South Korea is becoming very close to us in the dollars spent per year on basic research compared to GDP. And other nations are approaching us or exceeding us. Our country simply has to come to grips with that. The omnibus error was our fault as a Congress, and the president had little choice but to sign it. But why? So the administration saved money because less money was spent on science in 2008. Why, in the 2009 proposal, didn't the administration fund or propose funding all the ACI entities, whether in NSF, DOE, NIST, at the fiscal year 09 authorization? In other words, continue what they would have done had we passed the 08 authorization that was requested by the president. The omnibus bill, like it or not, it cut science funding substantially, but that did save the administration some money. Now, why base next year's proposal, or the fiscal year 09 proposal, on a faulty 08 fiscal year result? And I've never understood that method of budgeting. I happen to be a fan of zero-based budgeting, but be that as it may, it just doesn't make sense to me. If we set ourselves on a path to double the funding for research in DOE, NSF, and NIST, to double in a certain number of years, just because we fall back in one year, why do we have to fall back in this next year as well? Why not restore that? Do you have an answer for that?
I'm not sure I can answer all of those questions.
You don't have to answer all of them,
But,
just
well, certainly, in my view, the 20% increases for these agencies, and two of them are quite large agencies, represents a very powerful commitment by
No
the
question.
administration.
No question.
In a time when the president is holding the rest of the discretionary budget to less than 1% growth, I mean, below inflation. These priority areas are getting a huge increase, even in the area where people are concerned about the education sections of NSF and other agencies. The increases are, on the order of 9%. These are big increases at a time when the nation is facing budget deficits and difficult economic times. And I think that the prioritization within this budget request reflects the needs of these agencies. I mean, I think these are healthy requests.
I don't argue with that. My argument is simply very simple. If we had, in fact, passed the president's request this past year, which both appropriations committees had decided to do, you would have put more money in this. In other words, when we went on the NIH doubling path a decade ago, every year we had an agreement, and every year we doubled, or we took the steps to double in a certain amount of time, and we fulfilled our commitment to do it. Here, after 1 year, we're falling back.
I'm not sure of that. I'd like to get back to you on that, because I think the increases that the president is requesting for this year actually get us back up on the original ACI schedule. There has been the difference between the omnibus bill and the president's request this year is much greater than the difference that he would have had to ask for had the omnibus bill funded the
No, I understand that, and we'll discuss that privately. We don't have to hash that out here.
Okay, but I believe, let me just state finally, I believe the FY09 request was not for the ACI agencies was not based on the FY08 request, but was an independent judgment of what needed to be done to meet the president's targets. And I'll be glad to say that in writing.
Okay, thank you very much. Yield back.
Ms. Woolsey's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I was here for your testimony, sir. I had to leave and then come back, and you know how we are. But your answer to my colleague, Congresswoman Richardson, and then to Congressman Ellers still makes me confused. Why are you asking us for support if you think what the president's budget does is adequate? That's confusing to me.
Congress appropriates the money.
Right.
And I'm speaking to, this is my opportunity to speak to Congress.
All right. Okay. So in asking us to help, will one of the pieces of legislation that then we can do more about, would it, in the Competes Act, advanced research projects, ARPA-E? I mean, if we can do more for you, will the White House support more for our move to replace fossil fuels with more energy efficient technologies? Is it going to work both ways, or do we help and then we put more money into old-fashioned energy systems?
The failure of the president to designate and create an ARPA-E within his budget request does not mean that this request falls short of what's needed for investments in energy-related research. Under the Advanced Energy Initiative, which funds agencies it funds parts of the Department of Energy that do the same things that the ARPA-E would do, or similar things. There's a very large increase. I think there's about a 25% increase in the budget for energy-related technology research and development and technology. Very large increases, a base of about $3 billion, I think, now. And the president's requesting an additional $600 million for that area. So So there isn't any failure to rise to the occasion, as it were, for energy-related research.
But remember, my question to you was, is it energy that will take us to the future so that it's getting beyond fossil fuels, or is it staying with the same energy programs that we've had in the past?
Absolutely. The advanced, I believe there's some detail in my written testimony. I apologize for not having time to go through all of that in my oral, but there are large requests for biomass, solar, hydrogen fuel cells, hybrid electric systems, wind energy, geothermal, and nuclear power, all receiving increases under that title. So I believe that this bill, this proposal does in fact address important national needs in the energy technology area.
So I'm probably going to ask you something that's unfair because I have a couple of seconds left, I'm sure. Do you have any idea why the president feels that it's okay to increase the Pentagon's budget by 8% and leave projects like ARPA-E without any funding at all?
The objective, as I explained, the objectives of ARPA-E, as I understand them, are in fact funded through other programs within the Department of Energy. When it comes to the Department of Defense, there are major increases in basic research in this budget proposal for the Department of Defense, which is a major funder of things like nanotechnology and other things that are important for our competitiveness. So that the President's increases for the Department of Defense do not ignore or shortchange in any way other areas of the science budget. We think that the science budget proposal in this document is healthy. It addresses the needs of the nation, and I don't think that there's any need to feel that the defense budget is somehow causing the science programs to be short funded.
Well, do you think that would make any kind of sense to remove these programs from the Department of Defense and bring them over to the other side of the fence so that we don't have to have this huge defense budget to get something done?
Well, the Defense Department has traditionally been the major supporter of research in engineering particularly, and in material science and lasers and other things. They have a strong track record of success in these areas. So, and furthermore, research in these priority areas is important for the Department of Defense missions. So I think it is appropriate to see the research or robust research budget in the Department of Defense.
Thank you, Ms. Woolsey. And Dr. Gingrey is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Dr. Marburger, thank you for your testimony. And, relating back to what the gentlelady from California just said, Ms. Woolsey, we're not often necessarily on the same page on every issue, but I think she does bring up a pretty good point, and it makes me wonder sometimes if when we get reports like we did with the gathering storm and the fact that the statistics, we all realize that we're so far behind other developed countries in math and science, and the push by this committee to pass the America Competes Act and to try to address that problem with more funding for STEM research and education. It makes me wonder sometimes if we're fighting hard enough. And when I say we, I'm talking about these agencies to which these budgets apply, and maybe even Dr. Marburger, yourself and your committee and the great scientists that you and others are that advise the President and advise the administration. I also sit on the House Armed Services Committee, so I'm a strong proponent for continued funding for our national defense and growing that, and I think it's important what we do in DARPA, as you pointed out. But I think, as she pointed out, in regard to ARPA-E, we're talking about alternative energy sources and If that's not a threat to us, both economically and security-wise, I don't know what else is. I mean, certainly it is a threat. So it makes me wonder if you guys, if I can use that expression, are fighting hard enough to get your share of the pie. And of course, we want to keep the pie small. I do, as a conservative, fiscally conservative Republican, and I'll continue to take that posture. But here again, I mean, Dr. Ayler's pointed out in regard to agricultural extension programs and the number of people that today in this country are involved in agriculture as their means of income versus those that are involved in manufacturing, and we have no money in here for MEP. Which is so important in every district of 435 members of this House of Representatives and 100 senators, and I don't get that part. So I might, I'll better finish up quickly. You'll have no time to respond. But in regard to the math education as an example, you got funding. Your testimony says that your budget does not support significant expansion of STEM education programs that are housed outside the Department of Education. Why not? So at this point, I'll turn it over to you and let you respond to my diatribe.
Thank you, Congressman. I'll try to spend a minute on each. First of all, with respect to energy technology, I think a 25% increase in a $3.2 billion base for advanced energy technology it really is responding to the need for in this area. And so the fact that the president did not fund on those activities through ARPA-E does not mean that we're not funding them. ARPA-E was authorized at $300 million this year, but the president's request for research in these precise areas was $600 million, so that we can't say that this budget represents a pullback from the need to fund energy technology. With respect to the remark in my testimony that's indicated that some significant expansion of education programs took place only in the Department of Education, I think that's an artifact of a way of counting these things that perhaps OMB, from whom I got those talking points, expresses it. The fact is that the budgets for education in the National Science Foundation are approximately equal to the budgets for math and science education in the Education Department, and the increases there were increases in certain ACI categories that were quite substantial this year in the Education Department. There was a 9% increase in education in the National Science Foundation on a pretty big base. So I'm not sure that we're comparing apples and oranges here, but I know that the president is asking for increased money both in the National Science Foundation and in the Department of Education. Education Department is designed to address large-scale education programs, implementation, if you wish, of education, whereas the National Science Foundation's role here is to develop materials and learning techniques and so forth, doing education in math and science research. And they both do a good job at at their respective missions.
Gentlemen's
I'll just stop there.
I would, so I guess, Dr. Marburger, you're satisfied, since the Department of Education has been doing such a good job, you're satisfied with our international rankings?
I think the international rankings are difficult to interpret.
Okay. Well, then let me, since we're all close, we'll let Congresswoman Ada Bernice Johnson is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'll simply ask, you might not have time to answer my question in completion. I got here a little late, so maybe you address this. But to me, the most important thing about any future in research or anything else is finding the students interested. And what I'd like you to do is describe to me the activities that you are involved with, or that you know education is involved with, and seeking that preparation for our nation for the future. If we can't have basically prepared people to do this, the rest of it is for naught. So I thank you. I look forward to receiving your response.
Thank you. I would like to respond to that in writing because there's such a large number of programs that are funded and increased in this budget proposal.
I'd like also
And I-
your
and I will.
recruitment activity.
And recruitment, I will look into that. I can't respond to that immediately.
I really can't read what's in here for funding. I just want to know some activities that are encouraged, that's supported by the administration, or that is going on to get the attention of young people to participate in these programs.
I think I understand, and I do believe information exists on that I will send to you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. And because of Ms. Johnson's courtesy, Dr. Bartlett, you can close us out here as we have 10 minutes to a vote.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your testimony, sir. The same gentleman that predicted that the United States would reach its maximum oil production in 1970, M. King Hubbert, predicted that the world would be reaching its maximum oil production about now. And as you know, the IEA, International Energy Agency, and the EIA, the Energy Information Agency, have both been tracking the production and consumption of oil, and they have shown that to be flat for the last 30 months. With a flat production and an increasing demand, oil has increased from $40 a barrel to I think it's about $95 a barrel today. A couple of weeks ago, Shell Oil Company issued a statement saying that not later than 2015, just around the corner, that the world would not be able to meet the demands of our industry with oil and gas. The Hearst report, the first of 4 reports paid for by our government and ignored by our government, published in 2005, said that if you didn't anticipate this maximum production of oil, peak oil, by 2 decades, that you would have meaningful economic consequences of that. Considering, sir, that most of the monies that we are spending are business as usual, wind, solar, nuclear, biomass, and ethanol, I would submit that we really do need an ARPA-E. None of these things that you mentioned in that list, and they're all very admirable, but they're not the cutting-edge kinds of things that we're going to absolutely have to do if we're going to avoid a big train wreck. I see little indication on the part of the administration that they understand the seriousness of the challenge that we face. My wife, by the way, says that I shouldn't be talking about this. That don't I remember that in ancient Greece they killed the messenger that brought bad news. And I tell her this is a good news story because if we start today, the ride will be less bumpy than if we start tomorrow. I find this exceedingly challenging. There's no challenge like meeting and overcoming no exhilaration like the challenge of meeting and overcoming a big threat, and that's what this is. Shouldn't we, sir, have a really aggressive program in ARPA-E considering the real challenge of energy in the world?
I certainly agree that we need to be working very hard and doing everything that we can to address the energy challenges, whether it's spent through ARPA-E or through the Advanced Energy Initiative or something else. I'm not as concerned as long as it's being spent. And I do think that there is a substantial commitment by this administration to addressing the issue of energy security, which means that we should be able to use the energy resources that we have available to us, including nuclear and coal, without contaminating the environment. And that's why the President is seeking funding for demonstration projects and programs to produce electricity from coal without adding to the CO2 in the atmosphere. I think that there's in fact a very compelling set of initiatives that have been defined by the Department of Energy in their energy technology plans that, if funded, would in fact help us to meet this very grave and very serious challenge. I agree the challenge exists, that we ought to be doing something for it. I think the President is asking for the funds to do that.
You know, sir, most of the things that we're doing are to produce more electricity. I'm fairly sanguine about the future and electricity production. I think with more micro hydro, which has a huge potential, I think, with a lot more nuclear, with wind and solar, if we can get around the huge storage challenges there, that we can probably produce about as much electricity as we would like to use. I'm not at all sanguine about liquid fuels. I see almost nothing out there that can take up that slack. I spent a week in South America with the chairman of our committee on agriculture. He believes that at the end of the day, when we have exploited every potential we can for fossil fuels, renewables for fossil fuels, that we will be producing about a third as much oil equivalent as we are today. We can live very happily with that, sir, but that's going to require a huge investment, don't you think?
Absolutely.
Thank you,
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
In summary, Dr. Marburger, I think what you've heard on a bipartisan basis is more of the same in education, more of the same in our energy research is not getting the job done. We have to look at a different way to approach these, or we're going to continue to be, 21st with our students. We're going to be, running out of energy. So, but let me say, as to paraphrase Dr. Bartlett, you are the messenger, and we respect that. We respect you, and we thank you for coming here, and I'm glad that we could get you out before we had to hold you up on this vote. This committee will receive any additional statements from members and questions that they would like to have as follow-up answers from the witnesses, and the witnesses excused, and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.